Good afternoon, and I'm glad we were able to sort of put this all together. It really is a miraculous that it's working at all, as particularly as well as it's working. So we can't wait to hear from you. My name's Andy Levy. I'm a trial lawyer in Baltimore, Maryland, and I also teach at both of Maryland's law schools. And I am in a little town called Highland, which is halfway between Baltimore and Washington, D.C.
Good afternoon now. My name is Chuck Dunlap. I'm Executive Director of the Indiana Bar Foundation, and I'm joining you from Indianapolis, Indiana. I'm also an adjunct professor at the Indiana University School of Public and Environmental Affairs. So have that as well and look forward to hearing from you.
Hi, Florida. My name is Caitlin Johnston. I am an in-house lawyer at Peloton, which sells bikes. And I was a We the People participant back in Indiana growing up. Never made it to nationals though, so congratulations on being here. I'm joining you from New York City in my little studio apartment. So pleasure to meet you virtually and looking forward to the discussion.
Nice to meet you all. I'm Yazzie Issa.
I'm Rayna Gordon.
Hi, I'm Katie Sullivan. Thank you so much for joining us. And we also have our lovely coach and teacher, Miss Trish Everett, is here today with us as well.
Well, that's great. Congratulations to you all. So I'll get on with the question. It's no mystery what it is, but just so we're literally on the same page, I will read it for you. Unit 5, question 2. Richard Posner wrote that the American public worries more about invasions of privacy than about summary proceedings against suspected terrorists, curtailment of the freedom of speech of the law-abiding, or the right of the media to publish government secrets. Do you agree or disagree with this statement? Why or why not? To what extent, if any, is privacy in jeopardy today? What protection, if any, do people have from privacy violations by governments or businesses? And you may begin whenever you want.
Okay. We do somewhat agree with Posner's statement. While yes, many American people may not worry about them personally being accused of terrorism or their ability to support terrorists, many Americans do worry about the people surrounding them supporting terrorists. Although these concerns no longer triumph the public's worry over invasions of privacy, such fears were far more important to the American people 19 years ago after 9/11. According to a Pew Research Center study, just after 9/11, 70% of Americans agreed that all citizens should be required to carry national ID cards to identify themselves at all times. Of course, when that same question was asked 10 years later, only 57% of Americans agreed with that statement. Also, between the time of 9/11 and the passage of the Patriot Act, 55% of Americans agreed that it was necessary to give up some civil liberties in order to curb terrorism in the United States. Also, like the poll mentioned earlier, when this question was asked again 10 years later, only 40% of Americans agreed it was necessary to give up some of their civil liberties in order for more safety. This poll, like the other one, demonstrates how after 9/11, the American people were indeed willing to give up some of their privacy in order to remain safe. Of course, this has changed over time, with privacy now being more important, which is why Posner's statement is valid at this point in time.
Privacy is undeniably in jeopardy today. After the events of September 11, 2001, the government has limited American citizens' privacy in order to avoid similar acts of terrorism, specifically regarding an increase in phone and web surveillance. They were now allowed to track the phone calls and emails of American citizens without a warrant. In the Supreme Court case of ACLU v. NSA in 2007, the ACLU sued the U.S. government, saying that the program was an overreach of power and that it violated the Fourth and Fifth Amendments. However, the United States Court of Appeals at the Sixth Circuit said that the ACLU did not have legal standing to sue, due to the fact that they did not have any proof. The Supreme Court declined to review the case. In 2013, Edward Snowden leaked classified documents from the CIA where he worked as an employee. Because of Snowden, we discovered that the National Security Agency has annually looked into around 56,000 emails and other communications by Americans with no connection to terrorism, and in doing so, violated our country's privacy laws thousands of times per year. A technologist at the ACLU said that the NSA is making the internet less secure and exposing us to criminal hacking, foreign espionage, and unlawful surveillance. There is no doubt that as American citizens, our privacy is at risk. However, sometimes the right to privacy has to be given up to live in a safe and secure country. Therefore, we believe that it is necessary to feel a little less private if it means we can guarantee our national security as a whole.
Protections from privacy violations by the government and businesses are embedded within our Constitution. Two of these protections lie in our Fourth and Ninth Amendment. The framers made certain to provide American citizens with privacy in their own homes and from the government through the Fourth Amendment, which makes unreasonable searches and seizures illegal. This amendment was put to the test in the landmark Supreme Court case Mapp v. Ohio. The Supreme Court held that any evidence obtained during an illegal search and seizure may not be used against someone in a court of law, thereby protecting privacy in the homes of American citizens. Another type of privacy that is protected by the Constitution is the right to marital privacy. In the Supreme Court, the right to privacy can be very tricky and often referred to as a penumbra. A penumbra is literally a shadow that occurs within an eclipse, but is used in government to mean the rights that are implied by a piece of legislation. In the decision of Griswold v. Connecticut, the Supreme Court decided that the First, Fourth, and Ninth Amendments create a penumbra that encompasses the right to marital privacy. In another landmark case on this matter, Roe v. Wade, a woman sued the Texas government for passing a law stating that women can only receive abortions upon a doctor's order that the pregnant woman's life is in danger. The Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment protects citizens from state action against the right to privacy, making the Texas law null. All in all, protections against privacy violations by the government are found within our Constitution and the penumbras that lie partially hidden within it. Thank you.
So thank you, and we will get started with some questions. So most of your opening seem to involve limiting the power of government. Do you believe that there's a greater threat to our privacy from government than there is from private entities, non-governmental actors?
That's a good question. And I would say no, that there's a bigger threat from privacy from our government. And this is why, because there's been several cases where the government, there was a case in California where the FBI was researching something and they asked Apple to hack into an iPhone, and Apple would not do that for the government. And so I just think that demonstrates how these private entities are actually going to try and protect our rights and our privacy, whereas the government, like Rayna and Yazzie said, are actually going through these emails and violating rights.
I agree with my colleague, and like we said in the prepared statement, we said that the Supreme Court declined to review the case with the Supreme Court and the ACLU, and what happened was they were going through people's emails which had no ties to terrorism, and I agree that they should be able to go through them when there is evidence of a crime was going to happen. But if there was no connection to terrorism and the government was going through people's emails and calls, I think there is definitely a greater risk to privacy with the government instead of private entities.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about in the current environment or any sort of national emergency, but in the current COVID-19 situation and the idea of the contact tracing and tracking movements of people in order to for the public safety. How should courts analyze that in order to also preserve individual privacy rights? And are there precedents for how the courts should respond to this?
Nothing like this has ever happened in American history before, so I think this is a difficult question, and there is no precedent we can look towards. But I do think that in wartime situations, sometimes the laws have to be changed and the way we interpret the laws are changed. And although this is not a wartime situation, I think this is a dire situation which we've never come across before. So I think that it is necessary, obviously, to track who has the virus, where they're going, who they might have infected. And overall, I think that people might say that this is an invasion of privacy. But like we said, sometimes your privacy has to be given up a little for the greater good of the people. And I think in this situation, it is a case in which it needs to be given up for the greater good, and so people don't lose their lives.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that if we're following any precedent during this time, it would be to look at changes in wartime and wartime laws. When you look at like the Civil War after 9/11, there is like a clear shift of standards towards what can be legal and what is allowed. And I think that right now, like in the interests of the American people, certain laws and certain privacy restrictions have to be suspended.
And I would just like to add on to that by saying, kind of after 9/11, we saw the Patriot Act, which really changed privacy and security in our country to lengths that we didn't see happening before that time. And so I think that now we're seeing that this is, we've been in that stretch of time after 9/11. Well, now this is a next period in time where it's the time after coronavirus, and how are we going to deal with that? And there's been the Spanish flu, but not when we had this technology to change everything that's going on. And I think the only precedent we're seeing right now is in China, in Wuhan, where they are just they're just out of quarantine and they're scanning on buses and different things, places to mark where they've been. So that's really the only precedent that we have going into this.
So I'd like to turn to private industry. It sounds like you put a fair amount of faith in corporations looking out for us. What about if Instagram took it upon itself to disclose to other Instagram users who had tested positive for COVID-19 and made that available, say in service of the greater good? How do we look at that from a privacy perspective and what rights we have?
I don't think all of our faith should be placed in private entities. Obviously, they can violate the privacy restrictions as well. I think that's a perfect example. And I think that based on our written statement, we can argue that if Instagram were to release the names of the people who had coronavirus, that would be a definite invasion of privacy. I think, like we said earlier, it's important to note who has the virus and like how many people have the virus and where they go and who they have infected. But that information needs to stay private. Based on medical records need to stay private, and that would be an invasion of privacy if they were to release who had it, because that's not fair.
But what if what if you told Instagram, if you volunteered that information to Instagram?
If I volunteered the information to Instagram, they could have that information, but they shouldn't be able to pass it on to other people. No one else should be able to know.
I actually disagree with that statement, because you have to, once you download Instagram and you make an account, you have to sign your terms and agreements. And so I think Instagram can do what they want with that information if it's under their terms, and you wouldn't really have a right because you sign them away. So.
And what about them giving that information to the government, or letting the government use location data to see whether folks are social distancing? Oh, you got saved by the bell.
We're going to assume you had a great answer to that as well. So we'll give you credit for a great answer to that. So thank you. Wow. So this was our last hearing. I guess it is yours as well. And you really, it's nice because we really ended on a very high performing note. I enjoyed very much your opening statement and your weaving in a lot of the references, the Supreme Court cases, but also the sort of the bringing it to date and putting it in the light of sort of current circumstances. And you had a good answer to Chuck's question along those lines. I think that the only I would have liked to have heard a little bit more about the private aspect versus government, which even though the question probably does have its thumb on the scale towards government. So I don't think your presentation was unreasonable in that respect. I think it is one of the hardest sort of questions, and of course these are all hard questions, which makes your presentation, all the more remarkable in terms of sort of how thoughtful it was. But just that sort of that relationship between private and public is among the most difficult sort of issues raised by this. But thank you very much. I know that you were preparing for this under very difficult circumstances, and I've been judging We the People for years, and really the quality has been just as good as it ever was. And that's a tribute to Miss Everett, your teacher, Miss Witkowski, your parents, but most of all, you guys. Just great job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I agree. It was a lot of fun. It was a great way to end my morning with this particular unit and discussion. A couple things that I really enjoyed, and So the idea of, the current situation that we're in, and have we faced this as a nation before? And I thought you did a nice job of saying, well, we did have the Spanish flu situation, but it's different now. We didn't have the ability to do this contact tracing to the extent with technology, and how we handle that under the current environment. There's some opportunities there, but there's also some risks there, and we're going to have to balance these competing interests, and that's not always an easy thing to do. And you have the sort of Chinese model, which they don't have the same protections that we do, and so there's a lot of balancing and a lot of really hard decisions that are going to have to be made, and we're living it. So it's exciting, and it's great you recognize that and really put that into context. I appreciated that. And the other interesting thing too, the idea of, who do you fear more? Is it the private sharing of private industries sharing and information versus the government? And, I don't know, there's some aspects of that. Government can take away your life, liberty, or property, and potentially that, private industry can't. But there's some pretty, downsides with private industry having your information too. So it's a different perspective, and the current framework of where we are and how we handle each of those is certainly evolving. And I think you did a really, really great job of understanding those nuanced principles. So really nice job.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. I liked your prepared remarks. I noted that you brought in some statistics, right, about kind of how you looked at the research on American sentiment during wartime, and then what happens 10 years later. And I would have loved to have heard in your analogy to Chuck's question on COVID, at what point after COVID has kind of faded into history, are we no longer going to be okay with maybe the greater the amount of privacy that we sacrificed for the government? But you definitely got that line of thinking because you had the wartime analogy in response to his question. With my question, I took what I thought your statement was based on some prior Q&A, and I put you in a box. I said, it sounds like this panel believes that we should trust companies. I think one of you gave me the Bernardino case with Apple, which was great to bring into follow-up. And Yazzie, I think it was you were listening very carefully to my question, and you didn't let me put you into that box. You said, no, actually, here's what my position is. And I think that's actually a really good skill when you're kind of defending a position, to be really listening to what somebody, on my side of the table, if I have a different agenda to kind of lead you down a path and tell you what you're saying, to say, no, that's not what I was saying. Here's another example, or let me elaborate on my thoughts. So I thought you all did a really excellent job, particularly in the Q&A, really having an engaging discussion with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you to all of you, and really stay safe. Great job. Keep thinking about this stuff. This is your world, and it will be what you make of it.
Thank you very